It was December 21st, 1945, when a phone call reached Dwight Eisenhower's office in Washington. The news was impossible to ignore. George Patton was dead. For years, Eisenhower had walked a tightrope, publicly reprimanding his most talented general, all while privately relying on him to win battles no one else could win. Eisenhower had defended Patton to political figures, made apologies for him to allies, and reined him in when his aggressive nature threatened to escalate into diplomatic disasters. But now, with Patton gone, Eisenhower was free for the first time since the war began, free from the need to carefully measure his words. What he said in the weeks and months that followed would reveal a truth that had been buried under layers of political necessity. Patton wasn't just a good general. He was irreplaceable, and his absence felt like losing the most powerful weapon of the war. If you want to uncover the raw truth behind Eisenhower's emotions when the mask of diplomacy was finally removed, subscribe right now to WW2 Frontline Shadow. Before they were supreme commanders and soldiers of destiny, Eisenhower and Patton were two young officers in the Tank Corps, beginning their journey together in 1919. At the time, both were captains. Patton, the wealthy aristocrat with a storied family lineage, and Eisenhower, the humble Kansas farm boy, still trying to make his mark. Though their backgrounds were worlds apart, they shared a vision, a shared belief that tanks were not just supporting machines, but the very future of warfare. These vehicles, fast and mobile, could devastate the enemy when used effectively. But the military brass rejected their ideas, stifling their innovation and threatening their careers. Patton, with his inherited wealth, could afford to be bold. Eisenhower, however, needing his paycheck, learned to choose his words carefully. 23 years later, these two captains would become the most powerful and feared figures in the Allied forces, but the nature of their relationship would be transformed. Eisenhower would now need to manage Patton, balancing his brilliance with the broader political and military strategies that governed their operations. Patton resented this shift. He believed Eisenhower had become too cautious, too politically driven, and too focused on diplomatic negotiations. Patton wanted to fight, not haggle over strategy. Their relationship became fraught with tension as Eisenhower was forced to control Patton's fiery spirit. One moment encapsulates the degree to which these two men were at odds. A scene from August 1943, during the Sicilian campaign. Patton, commanding the 7th Army, visited field hospitals and came across soldiers suffering from what would later be recognized as PTSD. Back then, it was referred to as combat fatigue, or shell shock. Patton, with his uncompromising mindset, saw these soldiers as cowards. He slapped 2 of them, berated them, and even threatened to shoot them. The fallout was immediate. Journalists picked up the story, and the political world exploded. Eisenhower had no choice but to act. He faced an impossible decision: fire Patton and lose his most effective combat commander, or keep him and risk a public uproar. Eisenhower chose a middle path. He issued a formal reprimand, made Patton publicly apologize, and ordered him to make amends to his army. The reprimand satisfied the public, but Eisenhower knew that politically, he had to make it clear that Patton would be controlled. Yet, Eisenhower already knew what others might not admit. Patton wasn't wrong. He had seen firsthand the devastating toll war could take on soldiers. Eisenhower privately sympathized with Patton's mindset, recognizing that mental toughness and endurance were essential for maintaining a fighting force. But politically, he could never say it. The public needed to see Patton as flawed, as someone in need of correction. Eisenhower understood this, but behind closed doors, he was already planning Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. He needed Patton more than anyone else for the war effort. In Sicily, Patton had shown exactly why. He moved faster, hit harder, and demoralized the enemy in a way no one else could. His 7th Army had raced across Sicily, while Montgomery's British forces moved with deliberate caution. The Germans feared Patton's speed and unpredictability. He was a weapon unlike any other. So Eisenhower, in a remarkable show of restraint, protected Patton's career while publicly reprimanding him. He faced harsh scrutiny from Roosevelt, Marshall, and others, but he knew Patton's value. By the spring of 1944, the D-Day invasion loomed, and Eisenhower faced another critical challenge: deceiving the Germans about the location of the invasion. Operation Fortitude was conceived, a massive deception involving fake radio traffic, dummy armies, and staged installations. Patton was central to the plan. The Germans believed Patton was the most dangerous Allied commander. He was aggressive, unpredictable, and deadly. Eisenhower used this reputation to his advantage, placing Patton at the head of a fictitious army that was supposedly preparing to invade the Pas-de-Calais region. Patton appeared at fake bases, gave speeches, and inspected inflatable tanks and fake landing craft. German intelligence, obsessed with tracking Patton's movements, was deceived. They kept their forces at Calais long after D-Day, believing that the real invasion was still coming. It worked flawlessly, but it drove Patton mad. He wanted to be in Normandy to fight, not to act. He felt humiliated by the ruse, and Eisenhower, who knew the truth of the operation, could never tell him. It was, to Patton, a betrayal. But Eisenhower had no choice. The deception was saving Allied lives by keeping German forces away from the real invasion. The summer of 1944 was a turning point for Patton. The Third Army he commanded advanced through France at a rate no army had ever achieved before. Within weeks, his forces liberated hundreds of towns and cities, defeated tens of thousands of German soldiers, and created chaos in the German lines. It was a dazzling display of military prowess, but Eisenhower, while proud, felt a sense of growing unease. Patton's speed was his greatest asset, but it also created problems. He was outrunning his supply lines, and coordination with the other Allied forces was becoming difficult. The British, led by Montgomery, were methodical and slow, while Patton simply surged ahead. In private discussions with his staff, Eisenhower expressed frustration with the slow pace of other generals, but he knew that in the political landscape of the war, he had to prioritize the coordination of all forces. Despite Patton's brilliance, Eisenhower had to curb his advancement for the sake of broader strategy. Patton was furious. He believed Eisenhower was wasting valuable time, but Eisenhower knew better. Politics and logistics couldn't be ignored. By December, the situation had become dire. The Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge, a surprise offensive in the Ardennes. American forces were unprepared, and entire units were surrounded. Eisenhower's top commanders gathered in a crisis meeting. The mood was grim. Then Eisenhower turned to Patton and asked, "How long will it take you to attack?" Everyone knew the task was monumental. Patton's forces were positioned far south and would need to pivot quickly to the northern front, cross winter weather, and hit the German flank. It was a logistical nightmare. But Patton, ever confident, wrote down the figures in a small notebook. 3 divisions, 72 hours, he declared. Eisenhower, knowing Patton's determination, trusted him. And on December 22nd, Patton delivered exactly as promised. 3 divisions from the Third Army hit the German southern flank, blunting the German offensive and turning the tide of the battle. It was a pivotal moment that validated everything Eisenhower had endured to manage Patton. The controversies, the headaches, the constant balancing act. It all paid off in that moment. Patton's actions in the Battle of the Bulge were proof of his unparalleled abilities. But in the aftermath of the war, Patton's controversial comments and his calls for conflict with the Soviet Union made him a liability. Eisenhower had no choice but to remove him from command. It was a decision that strained their relationship, one that neither man would fully understand at the time. Patton felt betrayed, and Eisenhower, though deeply conflicted, knew it was the only way forward. When Patton died shortly thereafter, Eisenhower was left to reflect on the man who had been, for better or worse, his most effective general. In private conversations following Patton's death, Eisenhower admitted just how vital Patton had been to the war effort. He was irreplaceable. Eisenhower confided that managing Patton had been the hardest part of his leadership, but also the most necessary. Without Patton's aggression, without his willingness to take risks and push forward when others hesitated, the war might not have been won. Eisenhower's memoirs, written years later, would state that Patton was indispensable to the war effort. Patton's force of will had shaped the outcome in ways that could never be replicated. But Eisenhower also recognized that those very qualities made Patton impossible to manage in peacetime. Eisenhower's thoughts on Patton were candid only after the war, once the political pressures had eased. He had been forced to hold Patton back, to make difficult decisions that ultimately allowed him to unleash Patton's brilliance at critical moments. The final irony was that Patton, the one general who could achieve the impossible, was himself a victim of the very forces he had battled against. Eisenhower never forgot him. Even in his final years as president, Eisenhower still spoke of Patton, of their early days at Camp Mee, their struggles during the war, and that moment when Patton had turned the Battle of the Bulge from a defeat into a victory. Patton was unique, one of a kind. Eisenhower always knew it, but only after Patton's death did he speak the truth freely. It wasn't just a loss of a general. America had lost someone who could make the impossible happen, someone who thrived in the chaos of war, someone irreplaceable. That was the man Eisenhower had to manage, and the man Eisenhower would never forget. What do you think? Was Eisenhower right to restrain Patton, or should he have allowed him more freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold truths from history's most riveting friendships and rivalries.